Welcome to DevBetter, the show where we discuss engineering and organizational problems we've encountered during our travels as a growing software development consulting firm. There's a fine line between being confident in your skills and firing ego rockets off at everyone, destroying productivity in the room as you go. When developers and leaders, or really anyone, continually use their own opinions to dominate situations and conversations, they actually create an environment where other opinions are reduced, lowering inclusion and shutting down innovation. When it comes to best practices, there are also different tiers of advice for developers at different levels. Though there are clear principles, patterns, and practices to follow when writing clean code, there are other essential, more nuanced elements to being a great developer. How do you take feedback? How do you handle pressure? How do you say yes? How do you say no? And how do you foster environments where teams can thrive are all parts of being effective regardless of your code's qualities. Today, we'll talk about the do's and don'ts of highly effective developers and how you can use these tactics to continually build good things with your team. All right, welcome back, Jesse Riley. Nice to see you, man. How you been?
What's going on? Yeah, just building stuff like usual. Trying to tell people, I'm serious. No, you can do that. You really can.
Nice. Last episode you were on was the TDD episode. Had a lot of fun. Talked about why you should do that. And in this episode, I figured you and I have always liked to sort of riff on how people level up in their careers and how you sort of phase through this continuum, if you will. Go walk with me without the magic of a YouTube graphic, because I'm bad at that. We start at the left towards where what you call emerging talent, to use the PC term. We called them junior developers back in my day. And then you move to the middle piece, which is your mid-level journey person type engineer. And then you move to the right, which is what you call senior engineers. And then there's kind of the upper echelon of that, which is a distinguished engineer and a fellow and all those things. And we want to talk about just how you go from left to right and what are some challenges and common thought patterns that I see, that you see, that we've seen together in people that successfully transition from each of those points right on a curve. And I just want to start with the baseline. What are some basic habits that make you good at your job? It sounds silly, but simple stuff like show up to meetings on time is a thing that I feel like I unfortunately have to say, #get off my lawn. Let's start with you. What are some simple things, work habits, programming habits, life habits that make someone successful?
Yeah, there's that whole thing of things you don't need to have skill for, right? Like you said, showing up on time. My watch works. I've planned appropriately, and if it's super important, I'm definitely going to make sure my stuff is ready way in advance. I'm going to test it at least once or twice. I'm going to have my tools available. I'm going to be ready so that when people jump in, we're not wasting time. We're just going with it. From a very rudimentary standpoint, those are easy things to just do. It's just real easy to do. Anybody can do that. Beyond that, the first wave of hey, you're starting to think about development, and you're starting to think about it, and everything's overwhelming because there's 1,000 things you could do. Find one you like and find a practical reason to do it, not just because of the money, which a lot of people chase. Because if you chase the money, you're going to have a bad time. And initially, you're gonna get the garbage jobs. You're gonna get the stuff that's not so fun. It may not be as exciting as you think, but you build those blocks up, and eventually you start to kind of see how these things sort of work together. Where does it really bolt in? All that good stuff. So from starting out, it's just eat the uglies. Just try it. It's fine. Everyone's got to do it.
Yeah. Next question. So basic life skills, right? Achievement unlocked. Next level, junior engineer. I want to come at this from two sides. One, as a junior engineer, how do I approach the fact that I have walked into a brand new industry that I know nothing about, but I think I probably know more about it than I do? And then the second direction is, how do the rest of us provide an ecosystem that allows for those junior engineers to thrive? So let's start with the first part. Wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, What do I do?
Well, you said the magic word ecosystem, so that means it has to be good.
Right.
So yeah, when a new dev walks in, what I like to do is pair them with someone, because I know that they're going to have their own ideas, their own approaches, and everything else, and they may have that intimidation factor of, holy crap, I've got a job now that they're paying me how much money, and holy crap, like how do I show how good I am, and then of course you always get the reality check of you don't really know as much as you do. But I think that for a junior dev, and I've told people this for years now, is like, and I've got this T-shirt by luck. No one told me to do it, but I focused on a language for a while. So I didn't worry about all the languages. I worried about the language that I was familiar with, because that was one less cognitive thing that I could unbolt from my head. Like I didn't have to worry about like looking up the syntax and all that. So I focused on C# for about 5 years straight. Purely because, one, I was doing mostly back-end stuff, but that allowed me to just continuously build and build and build on my awareness of the framework, my awareness of the environment, the IDE, and all the little shenanigans and silly things that kind of hang off the sides. It really isn't about producing the code. This is back in my day. We didn't have CI/CD, so it wasn't DevOps wasn't really a thing. So you had to know how the build worked. You had to know how your environment worked. How was your environment different? You had to know all these other little things. But the least friction I could create on my side, the better. And luckily, I worked with a pretty good group that has went off and built wonderful things. And that's the other side of it, which is I had an environment where, for the most part, we had some product-y PMO people that weren't good, but they were able to help unbolt you from the problems that you dig yourself into. Because every junior is going to do it. They're going to have that problem and keep banging on it and banging on it, and not ask the question of like, I'm screwed, please help.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's one of the key pieces that as a junior engineer, I've seen people make this mistake so many times, which is they don't raise their hand. They sit there, and it could be ego, it could be fear. There's a bunch of different reasons in the human psyche why you would do this, but they don't raise their hand and say, hey, I'm stuck, I need help. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you're a junior engineer and you're watching this video, don't do that.
No.
You're causing more problems than you're helping, because one, there's nothing wrong to admit you don't know something, okay? If anything, that's a show of maturity. Second, the quicker you go and have a conversation with a human being that knows the solution to your problem, the quicker you're going to learn. I tell people all the time, I wrote a bunch of our Terraform modules. Like if you go to GitHub and look at our open source stuff, my name's going to be all over those things. So when someone gets stuck on that, I have a Slack channel that I basically answer questions, and I told everybody, like, the second you get stuck, let me know, because I could probably answer in 20 seconds what it will take you 3 days to figure out, because Terraform is a pain in the ass. I love it, and it's a wonderful, although with the new licensing schema, I think people are getting frustrated with it, but I love it, but it's not something that you can just turn your brain on and get, especially if you're an application engineer, because it's a totally different pattern, and it's the way you use Terraform is different. And so the flip side, I want to say one more thing on what you said, and we can move on, is this is a probably very unpopular opinion, but I go on record with an article in either InfoWorld or CI, I don't remember which, stating that I think Fullstack is not a good idea. And before you throw lots of rocks at me, let me quantify and contextualize that statement. Fullstack is the endpoint of a rich, long career where you have been through many wars, you have lots of scars, lots of wounds, and you have figured out how to successfully make a React app do the thing it needs to do in the right way with the proper testing, and then turn around and implement a database table with an index and all the things you need on it, and then all of the stuff in between. If you're in Blazor, Ruby on Rails, Python, Django, you can safely ignore me, because those are server-side rendered frameworks, and they give you a different feel on what full stack really means. But full stack as a general profession, and recruiters that look for full stack junior developers, drives me absolutely freaking insane. because you're not going to find it. Like you're going to get some poor soul who spent tens of thousands of dollars at a code school, who's been told you are now officially a full stack JavaScript developer, and I'm going to hire them because they're smart and they can solve problems, right? And not because they came from a code school or they came from, they have that on their resume. I don't even care about that. They're going to come to me. They're going to pass my interview process as a junior engineer because they're awesome. And then we're going to say, all that crap that you learned, just throw it in the garbage because we don't care anymore. Because as you said, Jesse, the focus on one specific thing to go deep in is where you learn all of the things, the fundamental things you need to learn in order to become that omniscient full stack. I can move across anything. And again, some developers that are watching this are going to call bullshit on me and scream, no way, I'm a full stack developer. And you may be, and that's okay. But an effective engineer knows what threading is, knows how backends work, knows how to deploy to a cluster, knows how a load balancer works, understands that when the Java VM takes a dump, can go and look at a Stack Overflow exception and figure out exactly where the memory leak is, or understands N+1 problems on the backend. Front-end developers, which I'll tell you right now, I don't even know how to be a good front-end developer. They know things that I don't about how JavaScript works. And again, over a period of time, you will learn those things. But out the gate, I think it is unrealistic to, as a junior developer, claim any form of full stack proficiency. You can, again, say I've done it before, but to claim that you are an all-seeing, omniscient full stack developer, I don't think that's possible. This video is sponsored by us. To continue our mission of providing valuable educational resources to current and future software engineers and tech professionals, we've officially launched the DevBetter newsletter. Our monthly newsletter will bring highlights of the tech industry right to your inbox at the end of every month. Within each DevBetter newsletter, you'll find the top tech news stories, job postings that we believe are worth your time, and more importantly, development tips for your ever-growing knowledge base. If you think this is something you'd read, we've left a link in the description for you to subscribe for free. Now let's get back to the video. I love what you said about ecosystem, because that is another thing we spent a lot of time on, like what junior developers should and shouldn't do. I don't want to belabor the point. The ecosystem is quite possibly the most important thing for a junior engineer to thrive. And what I mean by that is you have to have both sides of the equation in place where the junior engineer can accept feedback and make mistakes, and the rest of the team knows how to mentor and grow another human being. Because a lot of times we make this mistake that I'm growing a role, I'm growing a job description, right? You're not growing a job description. There's another human on the side of that job description, and each person is different. So the more time you spend with that individual, learning their ins and outs and understanding how they operate psychologically and what makes them happy and what doesn't, the more you're going to be able to create an ecosystem where they can grow, right? You do want to set standards and say, dude, if you don't do XYZ, or hey person, if you don't do XYZ, your PR is going to get kicked out, right? Yeah. You absolutely want that. But at the same time, you also don't want to just simply, as a mid-level or a senior engineer, walk into GitHub, look at it and just say reject and then walk away. You want to tell that person why, because a junior engineer needs to know the mistakes that they made. And if you're not providing an ecosystem that gives them fast feedback, they're never going to grow. And if they don't grow, you're wasting your time and money, and they're going to get pissed and leave. Dang. Right?
Well, so yeah, and that's it, right? Like having a mid-level, and this happened a lot early in my career too. Is that I would, and I've called them the oracles, by the way. So you must consult the oracle before committing your code, which is garbage. So you would get you shouldn't have done it this way, and it's like, okay, well, why? And then come to find out, it's because you didn't write it the way they write it. You wrote it in the way you wrote it. So they reject it for that reason, which is fundamentally just stupid. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Like, do the test pass, and is it readable? Yes. Okay, then we're good to go. And kind of a nice segue into the mid-level type of thing. You got to realize that you're just now getting the dev ego, right? And for those of you playing the home game, this isn't 2 years. Right, like I've ran into senior developers that have only written code for 3 years. Sorry, no, wrong. they get to a point where they're like, I actually know what I'm doing. I actually know a lot of parts and pieces inside of various systems. And especially if they've been at a particular company for a while, exactly the same thing. Like they know how to make the bear dance, right?
Yep.
So when they look at it, you got to be able to go, that's not the way I would do it, but does it still satisfy the need? And then
Yep.
help them make it better. Don't sit there and go, well, it's no good because you didn't do it my way, which takes a huge ego check. Like I can guarantee you there's some people say, well, I don't do that. They just don't know how to write code. Really? You sure? Sure.
Yeah. So I have a silly saying here, and I've said this to clients, and it's resonated with them too. But writing code is not an engineering art. And again, hate me in the comments if you want. But it's not an engineering art. I mean, my wife is a structural engineer, and gravity doesn't change. That's engineering. Like she has a steel Bible that she reads to figure out exactly what equation she needs to use to solve a problem. We don't have that in software, right? We don't have a codex that tells us exactly what to do, right? We have to creatively solve problems in the moment, and it's liken it to painting, right? I may paint a Bob Ross happy little tree. Jesse may paint a Picasso weird ass blocky tree. I think mine's prettier than his is, but it's still a freaking tree. Who cares, right? His solution solves the problem. My solution solves the problem. As long as we're not like going out of the way and breaking like long-term architectural patterns, which is a different conversation. And that's the one a lot of the mid-level folks get into is you don't want to like come into an MVC app and start screwing it up and writing weird shit in your MVC app. You still want to write an MVC. But you can't critique someone else's code sheerly for the fact that it's not what you like. And it takes, as you said, an extreme ego check to avoid doing this, right? Because as a mid-level engineer, you've got your scars, you've won a few battles, you've lost a few battles, and now you're really beginning to feel like you got this. Your confidence has built because a lot of the times, again, juniors come in with little to no ego, at least the good ones via Dunning-Kruger effect, right? The good ones have little to no ego. Then you get to that mid-level and you're like, I got this. I know how this works. I kind of figured it out. It's like you just learned to ski. And you can kind of ski down the bunny slope now, and you're like, sweet, I can kind of do these things, and maybe I want to try and jump and do a twist and break my leg or something like that, but you still kind of figured it out. And this is where you have to avoid the trap of thinking you know more than you do, Dunning-Kruger effect, right? And that, to me, is the biggest mistake I've seen a lot of mid-level developers, because a lot of mid-level folks, they want to skip the mid-level and go straight to senior, because seniors are all the money's at, and it's the title, and everybody's excited about, I'm a senior developer. Honestly, I had more fun in my third, fourth, and fifth year as an engineer than I ever did when I transcended into the annals of an air quote senior developer. Because when you become a senior developer, there's this huge crush of responsibility now that you're responsible for people doing it right. And that's a big deal. If you have like 10 people underneath you and you have to make sure all 10 of those folks aren't sucking at their job, that's kind of a big deal and kind of a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it's
just a little.
All of a sudden you're hey, look, I can write code goes to I used to write code. I know looking at code now. Oh crap, I don't have time for this. Oh, and then it just starts to shift. My favorite and I worked with a lot of mid and senior levels over the past like probably 10 years or so, and one smell that I catch very easily is, are they fighting the framework that they're using? That's one of my favorite things in the world. Like, well, it doesn't do this thing, so I'm going to make it do it. Next thing you know, like they've, kind of like what you were saying, like they bolted on this weird monster of a thing kind of hanging off that no one really understands. And it's because they fought the framework that they were in. Like like it wasn't designed for that. It's not meant for that. And I think that's where the mids to seniors start to transition between those. It's like, now I kind of understand the language. Now I understand the framework. So the framework wants to do these things. Here is how I make that framework do the thing I want it to do. It may not be the way I want it to work, but don't fight the framework. Don't just save yourself months.
And here's kind of it's a reversal of my expectations of how these different levels work. And a lot of people think as you get more versed in being an engineer and you go to that senior level, you are solving more complex problems and you're cranking out lots of code per McKinsey's new productivity framework. It's all about the code. Don't get me started on that, but yeah. It's as you get better at your job, your solutions, and watch me on this because it doesn't make sense, should get smaller, more concise, and more targeted. Occam's razor. Because as you gain more experience, you recognize that the more complicated solutions, again, going back to fighting the framework, and I have a story on that, the more complex the problems you're solving, obviously there's going to be a lot of complexity in your solution, but it's almost like you start writing Twitter code or whatever it's called now, X code, where it's small, tight, concise, understandable, and it solves the problem well. And your functions go from being 6,000 lines, please God, don't write 6,000 line functions, to smaller, 200, 100 line, maybe even less functions that are all easily testable. And I'm going to tell you right now, this may not seem true, but it is more difficult to do that than it is to sit down and spew code. If I see a PR that's from an engineer on the client side, on one of my own engineers, that's just this big giant line of stuff, I know that they were either in a hurry, they didn't understand the problem, or they didn't spend enough time refactoring to get that code into a position to where it's small, concise, and understandable. I have a silly phrase, Occam's refactor, instead of Occam's razor. The simplest and smallest refactor of the code that makes the test pass is probably the correct answer. And it's also has the added bonus of being more readable and understandable by your colleagues, which is a huge win in of itself.
Yeah, and I think that, like, it's that Bloom's taxonomy, right? Like, you start to learn and be able to do the things, but yet at some point that knowledge becomes crystallized and you understand why you're doing it, what it's for, when it's going to be used. And it's funny you mentioned the 7,000 line method. What's your record for finding a class? Like, because for some reason I remembered this number, and I was curious, like, what's the biggest class you've ever ran into?
The biggest class I ever ran into was probably around 13 to 15,000 lines, if I remember properly.
Cool. Yeah. But,
that had the 7,000 line method in it. With I think it had 16 Boolean inputs where if you put a true on an input, it would run a certain piece of code. And sometimes these if statements, if Boolean A, and then there would be no else. It would just be if Boolean A, and they would skip over the block if Boolean B, which those of you who understand code, what that means is that if I pass true on Boolean A and Boolean B, guess what? It's going to run both. Yeah. And sometimes both of the code had completely different orthogonal, not even close to the same functionality and requirements. So you could massively F things up if you called this method wrong.
Yeah. And those sort of things, like I don't know what happened. Like, I've always been curious as to, like, who did you have in the room? How did this I don't know, like, those sort of things hurt my soul because there wasn't the professionals, right? No one stopped and went, wait a minute, and busted out the chainsaw, and
right.
Don't fall into those traps, and because you will hate life.
And that leads us to kind of the end of our continuum here, right? So as a mid-level developer, there's things, you need to focus on your career, focus on getting better, focus on keeping your ego in check. Now we're at the end where you're a senior engineer. I think it's totally fine for a senior engineer to have a little bit of ego because they have a lot on the line. Obviously, too much ego becomes toxic. To me, the difference between confidence and arrogance is how you treat other people. So you can be a confident person and stand firm in your convictions and ideologies and still not be a dick, which is totally possible. But as a senior engineer, and per what you just said, I would have expected the senior engineer in the room to look at the first check-in of this class and go, no. Hard no. Right, or even if you inherited a 13,000 line class and a 7,000 line method with 12 Booleans on it, you would at least look at that and go, okay, we have a tech debt ticket. that needs to be immediately solved. And the unfortunate thing is we all know that a lot of times product would be like, no, we don't need to do that. It works, don't it? And yeah, whatever. That's a different problem altogether.
Yep.
I love you product people, but sometimes you really frustrate me. But let's assume for the sake of argument that tech debt ticket is then prioritized and we're able to work on it. That senior engineer should never back down until that particular code is up to quality. Because if you sit there and you allow things like this to exist in your system, you are complacent to their production, in my opinion. And I know, please don't read me wrong, there are certainly scenarios where this isn't true and it won't work because of the pathologicalness of the organization that you live in. Yep. But a good organization that values innovation and values thought work and values craftsmanship and good software every single time is going to give you the green light to go and solve for those issues, because they know that what if a junior came in and accidentally put a default value of true on one of those Booleans. Yep. And all of a sudden we're charging customers, because this was in an actual commerce system. It was an e-commerce system for a giant retailer. Now we're charging everybody 15% more. Whoa, huge business impact. All of a sudden, we owe customers potentially tens of millions of dollars because one of our engineers made a mistake. You know, people may point at that engineer, and I'm like, no, it's not the engineer's fault at all. No. It's the system's fault that allowed for that to be produced. And this is where this is where you guys come in. This is where my senior engineers should sit there and put your foot in the ground and say, absolutely not. We will not ship garbage. Now, you do have to seesaw that with the fact that a junior engineer writing a piece of code that doesn't look exactly the way you want it to might be completely fine. Yep. If it solves the problem, it's refactored well, and it's small enough in the test pass, who cares? Check the thing in. But at the same time, you have to learn where to pick your fights. And I think that's the biggest skill that a senior to me needs to learn. When do you pick your battles? When do you dig your heels in? When do you use the political capital that you worked so hard for over your career to gain to get what you want? What about you, Jesse? What do you think is like the biggest quality you're looking for in your seniors?
In my seniors, I want opinions. Like you're right. I want them to have a strong opinion about something in particular. Now, usually at this point in your career, you're probably 10 years in, give or take. I could tell you that there are some senior engineers that hyper focused on a particular thing. Like one of them was super big into performance. That's just something they picked up. They learned really, really well. Now, that being said, the offset to it was everything had to be performant. And I'm like, no, we don't care about performance all the time. But right. I want to know, hey, this is going to be a problem if these conditions start to occur. So it's more like pick your battles at the right time. And don't fall into that garbage trap of like, I told you so, you didn't listen to me. No, it's at that point in time that doesn't work. So don't be cynical around those sort of things, but at least be maybe an expert in one particular thing, or be really, really good at a thing. I've known senior devs that one guy was really good at networking. Like the big thing of like, how much data can we put on the wire? I know who to go talk to. Mm-hmm. I know who to go ask. Yep. Generally speaking, they still could code like anybody else and up to a level of quality. However, they had a very strong opinion and a very strong bias towards a very particular skill that they had developed over the years. And they didn't ask for it. It just happened. Like that was their thing. And I think that knowing that's where you're going as a senior can be helpful, because then not only do you have an opinion, and you should have one at that point, you should also have a very deep skill that is went down way, way farther down than anything else, like almost a nuanced like thing. Like you understand it, you can work with it, but you may not be able to explain it all that great. You just like, look, I just know, like I can't replay the 7 instances that caused me to think this or know this, but let me show you. And then like, you just got to short circuit that piece. Which I think is a lot of, there's a lot of articles out there that skip over that part. There's a lot of like career advice that skips over that sort of like, I want to be a senior right away. Well, you need 3 years in this one tiny little niche of stuff to become the senior for that particular thing. Like, it's just not going to happen overnight. Like, give it time.
Right.
Give it time.
Yeah, experience. Yeah, and that's just the general problem with ladder climbing, right? Experience is way more important than sitting around and just chasing titles. It is. And the last thing I want to say here, and then we'll wrap it up, is that we have a saying around here where one of the most important things you can learn as a software engineer on any tier is situational awareness.
Yeah.
And that is a lot of what you just said resonates and kind of feeds into this concept where you understand the context of what's going on. You're not blind to your own opinion, and you're able to situationally assess what everybody else is saying. You're being objective, and you're taking feedback to understand what others are saying and how it feeds into your opinion. It doesn't mean that you're bending over and saying, "No, I'm not. I'm not going to do anything," or "I'm not going. My opinion doesn't mean anything." It means you're standing up for yourself, but at the same time, you're not blindly standing up for yourself in the face of your own ego. You are situationally standing up for yourself based on what you know, the facts you have in front of you, and what you understand. And it also extends into client engagements too, which isn't necessarily interesting for this, but inside your product groups, you always want to make sure that you are winning political capital, because you're never going to get what you want if you just stand there and put your foot down like my 3-year-old and say, "No, I'm not going to do that." Like, that's not going to win anybody anything, right? You have to be able to win friends and influence people. Good book, by the way, to be able to get what you want in certain situations. And that situational awareness of the politics of why people are saying what they're saying, the understanding of the impacts of what you're doing and the impacts of the problem that you're solving, all those things will help you get what you want in ways that aren't abrasive. And when people don't see you as abrasive, they will start to listen to you more, because surprise, surprise, people want to work with people they like. They don't want to work with people that make them angry or make them feel bad. So that's why it's 100 times more important, in my opinion, to be a professional. We go back to bring it full circle. Like, what is the number one word, the work habit, programming habit, life habit that, and Jesse, you and I have talked about this a lot, that makes you successful in life? And that's to be a professional. And that word professional means a lot of things. It has a lot of ideas behind it. It has some depth to it. But for me, it's simply this: coming into work every day, giving 110%, being nice to other people, keeping your ego in check, and learning things, and being humble and being curious. Those things should be enough for you to have a wonderfully long and extraordinarily lucrative career in whatever you choose to do, so long as you hold true to those values. Yep. Jesse, you have any closing words, and then we'll wrap it up?
Remember, as you're becoming a senior and you're being invited to those meetings that you weren't invited to before, you may start to see a lot more beyond development. So you'll understand a lot more as to your impacts of, if we do this thing, this is what the company gets for it. Start being mindful of that when you start to get to that level, because you may never have seen it before. You may never really understood, holy crap, how many people are using this right now? And if we screw this up, we're going to piss off 10% of our clientele. Okay, that's important. And you'll get a different level of gravity of the things that you're solving and being paid to solve. So just kind of keep an eye on that too. And it will happen in bits and pieces at first. It won't happen all at once. And then you'll start to see, like, yeah, you've been in this space, and the space up here looks more like that because everything's kind of wedged into it. So just keep an eye on that.
Right. For sure. Awesome. Thanks, Jesse. Appreciate your time as always, my friend. It was great talking to you. Hope everybody enjoyed this episode. Comment below if there's something that you think helped you succeed in your existing career and your long-term career. And we'll see you guys in the next one.
Like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks.